Hi friends, hope you are doing well. In this video we are talking about the top 10 countries where Americans get treated the worst in 2025. So, let's get started. Imagine booking your dream trip abroad, only to land in a country where people roll their eyes at your accent, refuse to serve you quickly, or even flat out tell you, "We don't like Americans here." And these is a real incidents happen with my friend. He went to China, and one of the residents of that country told him that we don't like Americans here. In 2025, travel has become easier in some ways, but also more complicated, especially for U.S. citizens. While many destinations welcome Americans with open arms, there are still places where being from the United States can feel more like a curse than a privilege. So today, we're breaking down the top 10 countries where Americans get treated the worst in 2025. And trust me, some of these names will surprise you. Stick around until the end, because I'll also share a bonus tip on how Americans can avoid standing out too much abroad. So, we will start from the number 10. So, number 10 is France. Let's start with one of the most obvious ones. France. Now, don't get me wrong. France is beautiful. The Eiffel Tower, the French Riviera, the food. Amazing. But ask any frequent traveler, and they'll tell you, Parisians in particular, are not always the friendliest to Americans. Why? Part of it is cultural. Americans tend to be loud, casual, and informal, whereas the French value formality and a certain level of politeness. If you walk into a shop and start speaking English without even saying bonjour, you've already lost them. In 2025, surveys by travel forums still rank France as one of the least welcoming countries for U.S. tourists. Not dangerous, but you'll definitely feel the cold shoulder if you don't adapt to their culture. Next up, that is number 9, Turkey. Tourism in Turkey is booming. Istanbul is one of the most visited cities in the world right now. But here's the catch. Political tensions between the U.S. and Turkey have been simmering for years. Because of U.S. involvement in Middle Eastern conflicts, many locals hold negative views toward American foreign policy. That sometimes translates into how ordinary Americans are treated, especially if you're openly talking about politics. And in 2025, the State Department has even issued advisories urging U.S. citizens to be cautious in Turkey due to protests and rising nationalism. So while Turkey itself is stunning, as an American, you might feel a little extra tension, but these is a reality for the Americans. Now, this one might shock you. Number 8 country, that is Mexico. It's the number 1 foreign destination for Americans. Millions cross the border every year. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Not every local is happy about it. Many Mexican communities feel overwhelmed by the flood of American tourists and expats buying up property. In some towns, U.S. buyers are driving up housing prices so high that locals can't afford to stay. This resentment shows up in daily interactions. Some Americans report being charged special tourist prices, or treated with less patience than locals. So yes, Mexico loves the money American travelers bring, but not always the travelers themselves. Now let's move to Asian country, that is a China. We all know about these country, and these a number 7 country. A relationship between us and China is not good at all. The US and China are in what many experts call a new Cold War. Trade disputes, tech bans, and political rivalries. And that tension spills over into travel. In 2025, visiting China as an American feels complicated. Some locals may be curious and welcoming, but others see you through the lens of politics. Reports of travelers being questioned more heavily at airports have increased. Also remember, English is not widely spoken, and cultural differences are huge. So even without hostility, Americans often feel unwelcome just because of how difficult it is to integrate. Number 6 country is Russia. No surprises here. Russia is one of the toughest places for Americans right now. Ever since the war in Ukraine and the sanctions, U.S.-Russia relations are at historic lows. In fact, in 2025, the U.S. State Department still has Russia listed under a do not travel advisory. Americans who do go often report being watched, questioned, or simply ignored by locals. Now, are all Russians hostile? Of course not. But the political climate is so intense that just having a U.S. passport makes you stick out in a very uncomfortable way. Number 5 country is Iran. Halfway down the list is Iran. Relations between the U.S. and Iran have been tense for decades, and in 2025, nothing much has changed. The Iranian government strictly controls visas for Americans, and even if you get in, you're usually required to travel with a government-approved guide. Locals themselves can be incredibly warm. Iranians are famous for their hospitality. But politically, you'll feel the restrictions everywhere. You can't move freely, you're monitored, and being American makes you an automatic foreigner of interest. So while you may not experience open hostility from regular people, the treatment is still some of the worst anywhere. In the list, number 4 is Cuba. Now here's one that's closer to home. Cuba. Tourism in Cuba is slowly opening up, but relations with the US are still icy. Americans often face higher fees and stricter rules than European or Canadian tourists. On top of that, decades of US sanctions have created a general mistrust. Many Cubans are friendly one-on-one, but at the institutional level, hotels, airlines, government services, Americans get the short end of the stick. So yes, you can visit Cuba in 2025, but don't expect red carpet treatment. Number 3 country is North Korea. Technically, Americans are banned from traveling to North Korea. But even if you could, it's hands down one of the worst places you could go. The North Korean regime has detained Americans in the past, often using them as bargaining chips in political negotiations. And let's be honest, the average North Korean citizen has been raised to see Americans as the enemy. So while it's not a typical vacation spot, it still deserves a top 3 spot on this list. Now you could be curious about the number 2 and number 1 country, so the number 2 is Afghanistan. At number 2 there is Afghanistan because, since the Taliban took over in 2021, Afghanistan has been one of the most dangerous countries for Americans. Kidnappings, anti-Western sentiment, and total lack of U.S. embassy support make it nearly impossible for safe travel. Even humanitarian workers have faced hostility. In 2025, the situation has not improved, and most Americans who enter do so at extreme personal risk. And finally, the number 1 country where Americans are treated the worst in 2025 is Yemen. This war-torn nation has been in crisis for years. With ongoing conflict, famine, and strong anti-US sentiment due to drone strikes and military involvement, Americans are often seen as the enemy. Travel advisories from nearly every government in the world say, do not go. If you somehow did, you'd face hostility not just from militant groups but from the sheer desperation of daily life there. It's not just unwelcoming, it's outright unsafe. So there you have it, the top 10 countries where Americans are treated the worst in 2025. But let me be clear, not every person in these countries hates Americans. In fact, in many places, ordinary locals are warm and friendly. It's often politics, history, and cultural misunderstandings that create the tension. And here's that bonus tip I promised. If you're an American traveling abroad and you want to avoid standing out, learn a few basic phrases in the local language and be respectful of cultural norms. Even just saying, hello, or thank you in someone's native tongue can completely change the way you're treated. Now, let me ask you. Have you ever visited a country where you felt unwelcome because you were American? Drop your experience in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more travel and geopolitics content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.